She sat in the left seat of a commercial airliner, hands steady on the controls, eyes calm but alert. To the passengers behind her, she was just another pilot doing her job. The kind people barely noticed unless something went wrong. Her uniform was neat, her voice on the radio clear and professional. No one in the cabin knew her story. No one knew what that calm voice had survived, or what it once commanded in the sky. The flight was routine. Clear weather, smooth air, a full passenger load heading toward a busy international airport. The co-pilot checked instruments while she guided the aircraft along its planned path. Air traffic control cleared them to maintain altitude. Everything sounded normal, ordinary, safe, but deep inside her, flying was never just a job. She had grown up watching the sky, learning to read clouds before she could fully understand words. Flying was not a dream for her. It was a discipline. Years of training had shaped her instincts. She learned early how to stay quiet, how to let results speak instead of stories. Life had taught her that the less people knew, the safer things stayed. She had left another world behind when she moved into commercial aviation. A world of strict silence, coded phrases, and missions that never made the news. A world where mistakes were not forgiven and hesitation could cost lives. When she chose this new path, she promised herself she would never look back. And for years she didn't. The flight crossed into controlled airspace near a military training zone. This was common. Commercial pilots were briefed about it. The military jets kept their distance. Everyone followed rules. Coordination made the sky safe. Then the radio crackled. It started with a sharp, unfamiliar tone cutting through. The calm exchange between pilots and air traffic control. The co-pilot frowned slightly and adjusted the volume. Another voice came through, firm and controlled, clearly military. Unidentified traffic, state your intention. Air traffic control responded immediately, clarifying the commercial flight's route and clearance. Everything should have ended there. It usually did. But then another voice joined the channel. Lower, more focused. Not aggressive, but alert. For a brief second, she froze. Not because of fear, because of recognition. The rhythm of the voice, the way it paused before speaking. The confidence without arrogance. She had heard that tone before long ago, at very high altitudes. The co-pilot glanced at her. Everything okay? She nodded slightly. All good. But her heart had started beating differently. Faster, not from panic, but from memory. The military voice came again, this time speaking to another jet. The words were professional, clipped, filled with terms only trained pilots truly understood. Then, casually, almost without emphasis, one of them said a call sign. Ghostwriter, maintain position. The world seemed to narrow to that single phrase. Ghostwriter. Her hands tightened on the controls, just enough to notice. That call sign wasn't common, it wasn't random, it was earned. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. The co-pilot didn't react. To him, it was just military chatter. To her, it was a door opening to a life she had buried carefully. Missions flown in silence. Skies that belonged to no country. Orders given once and never questioned again. She forced herself to breathe evenly. The aircraft stayed steady. The passengers felt nothing. Coffee cups didn't shake. Children kept watching movies on their screens. The military jets adjusted their formation. Air traffic control coordinated calmly. Everything was still under control. But then something unexpected happened. One of the F-22 pilots spoke again, this time addressing her aircraft directly, though officially it wasn't necessary. Commercial flight, appreciate your steady heading. It was a polite comment, professional, almost friendly. She responded the way any commercial pilot would, neutral, clear, by the book. Roger, maintaining course. Her voice was calm. Too calm. There was a short pause on the radio, just a second. maybe less. Then the same pilot spoke again, slower now, as if choosing words carefully. "Copy that, Ghost Rider." Silence filled the cockpit. The co-pilot looked at her sharply. Did he just? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed forward, fixed on the endless blue. Her jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in control. She knew what that meant. The call sign wasn't meant for her aircraft. It wasn't meant to be said there. Unless someone recognized something. Her flying style, her radio timing, the way she held altitude without constant correction. Small details most people would miss, but not fighter pilots. Especially not ones who had trained in the same skies she once ruled. The radio stayed quiet. After that, too quiet. The jets moved away, resuming their exercise. Air traffic control cleared the commercial flight to continue. Everything returned to normal on the surface. Inside her, the past was no longer silent. She wondered who was flying that jet. Whether they remembered her the same way she remembered them. Whether this encounter was chance or something else entirely. She said nothing to the co-pilot. There was nothing she could say. Not yet. The passengers would land safely. The flight would end like any other. Applause maybe, or nothing at all. But high above, among pilots who knew the sky differently, a name had been heard again. And once a call sign returns to the air, it rarely disappears quietly. The flight continued as planned, but something had changed inside the cockpit. The instruments still glowed steadily. The engines hummed with the same constant power, and the sky ahead looked calm. Yet for her, the air felt heavier, not dangerous, just awake. Like the sky itself had noticed her again. She kept her posture relaxed, just as training demanded. Years of experience had taught her how to hide storms behind a steady face. The co-pilot tried to return to routine talk, pointing out fuel checks and estimated arrival time, but his voice sounded distant to her ears. Her mind was no longer fully in the present. It was hovering between now and then. She had worked hard to build this quiet life. Commercial aviation gave her structure, predictability, and peace. No sudden orders, no coded briefings, no decisions that carried weight beyond passengers arriving safely. She liked being invisible. She liked that people saw her as just a pilot. But that single call sign had disturbed something she thought was long buried. Ghost Rider was not just a name. It was a responsibility. It meant flying when others couldn't. It meant being trusted with situations where rules bent and silence mattered more than praise. It was earned through precision, discipline, and absolute control under pressure. She remembered the last time she had flown under that call sign. The sky had been darker. The mission brief short, the return uncertain. She remembered promising herself that if she came back, she would never chase that life again, and she had kept that promise. Until now, the aircraft began its gradual descent. Air traffic control gave instructions, calm and routine. She acknowledged each one clearly. Her voice gave nothing away. Anyone listening would hear nothing more than a professional pilot doing her job, but the co-pilot was watching her more closely. Now he had noticed the pause earlier. The strange moment on the radio. Fighter pilots didn't usually speak directly to commercial crews unless necessary. "Have you ever flown military?" he asked casually, trying not to sound curious. She smiled faintly. "Long time ago." That was all she said. It was true. And incomplete. The runway lights appeared in the distance, guiding them home. She lined up the approach with smooth confidence. The landing was clean, controlled, almost effortless. The tires kissed the runway gently, and the aircraft rolled safely forward. Another successful flight. Another job well done. The passengers applauded lightly, unaware of how close the past had come to the present. After shutdown, she completed post-flight checks while the co-pilot handled paperwork. The door opened, and cabin crew thanked them. As usual, Everything followed routine, yet even on the ground, she felt watched, not by people, but by possibility. Later, as she walked through the terminal, her phone vibrated once. Just once. She stopped. The message was from an unknown number. No greeting, no explanation, only 2 words. Still sharp. Her breath caught, just slightly. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Whoever sent it knew. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, city lights glowing through the window. She replayed the flight in her mind, every radio exchange, every subtle pause. Fighter pilots didn't make mistakes on open channels. That call sign had been spoken on purpose, which meant someone had recognized her, or someone wanted to remind her that the sky remembered. She thought about the young pilots still flying at the edge of human limits, about the new threats that didn't exist when she first wore that call sign, about how experience, once earned, never truly fades. Her phone vibrated again, another message. Same number. No pressure. Just respect. She leaned back, eyes closed. She wasn't angry. She wasn't afraid. She was conflicted. Because a part of her, the part she had trained to silence, felt something close to pride. And another part, the one that had chosen peace, felt uneasy. She knew how these things started. A conversation, a meeting, a just this once request. That was how quiet lives became loud again. She stood and walked to the window, looking up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, jets were still flying, practicing, preparing, and somewhere among them, someone had spoken her name into the air. She whispered it once, softly, just to hear it again. Ghost Rider. The city below slept peacefully. But the sky above was no longer done with her. The next morning began like any other, but she felt the difference the moment she woke up. The silence in her apartment felt thinner, as if it could tear at any moment. She followed her usual routine: coffee, weather briefing, flight schedule, but her mind refused to settle. The sky outside was clear, almost inviting, and that made her uneasy. At the airport, everything looked familiar. The smell of fuel, the echo of rolling suitcases, the steady rhythm of departures and arrivals. She blended in easily, another uniform, moving with purpose. Yet she sensed it again, that quiet awareness she hadn't felt in years. The feeling that someone somewhere was paying attention. Her assignment that day was short haul, easy, the kind of flight she usually enjoyed. But before boarding, operations called her aside. Nothing urgent. Just a small update. There's a military exercise near part of your route, the supervisor said. Standard coordination. Nothing to worry about. She nodded, already knowing more than he could imagine. In the cockpit, she completed checks with practiced ease. The co-pilot chatted about weather patterns and weekend plans. She listened, responded when needed, but stayed mostly quiet. Her focus was sharp, her senses tuned higher than usual. Years ago, this state had been normal. Now it felt like wearing an old uniform that still fit too well. After takeoff, the aircraft climbed smoothly. She held the climb rate perfectly, making minimal corrections. The sky was wide and empty ahead, clouds scattered like thin brushstrokes. For a while, everything remained calm. Then the radio came alive again. Multiple voices this time. Military frequencies overlapping with civilian channels. Controlled, efficient, fast. She recognized the structure immediately. This wasn't just practice. It was evaluation. One of the voices cut through, direct and confident. Commercial flight. Maintain present heading. Air traffic control confirmed. She acknowledged that, but then she heard something else. Not words intent. A subtle shift in tone that told her someone was watching her aircraft closely, measuring, learning. Her co-pilot adjusted his headset. Busy skies today. She didn't respond. Her eyes stayed forward. A fighter pilot spoke again, this time to another jet, but loud enough for her to hear. Watch the liner. Clean profile. No drift. Her jaw tightened slightly. That wasn't standard commentary. That was analysis. She made one small adjustment, barely noticeable. A precise correction that smoothed the aircraft's path even further. It was instinctive. Not planned. There was a pause. Then a short laugh came through the radio. Quiet, respectful. "Yeah," the fighter pilot said. "That's her." The co-pilot turned toward her. "Did you hear that?" She exhaled slowly. "Focus on your instruments." The jets stayed near but kept their distance, moving like shadows at the edge of sight. She didn't look for them. She didn't need to. She could feel where they were, the same way she used to. Minutes passed. The aircraft flew on, steady and safe. Finally, the military voices faded, peeling away one by one until only civilian traffic remained. The sky went quiet again, but the damage was done. After landing, she was called to a private office near operations. No uniforms inside. Just two people in plain clothes. Calm, polite, professional. "We won't take much of your time," one of them said. "This is unofficial." She remained standing. "I figured." They didn't mention Ghost Rider. They didn't need to. They spoke instead about airspace safety, pilot judgment, and experience. About how rare it was to see certain skills displayed without effort. "You're not in trouble," the other said. "This isn't recruitment." She almost smiled. "It's a conversation," he continued. "One between professionals." They left her with a card, no logo. Just a number. As she walked back through the terminal, she felt lighter and heavier at the same time. The past wasn't chasing her. It was inviting her. That evening, she sat in her cockpit seat during a quiet turnaround, hands resting on the controls. She looked at them for a long moment. These hands had flown many kinds of aircraft. They had carried people home. They had carried secrets. She didn't know what she would choose. But one thing was clear now. She was no longer invisible. And the sky, once again, was paying attention. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but heavy underneath. No more strange radio calls. No new messages. No unfamiliar numbers lighting up her phone. Life seemed to offer her a chance to forget again. To slip back into routine and pretend nothing had happened. But she knew better. Experience had taught her that silence often meant preparation. She focused on her work, flying back-to-back routes, keeping everything precise and professional. Passengers smiled, thanked her, trusted her without knowing why they felt so safe. She delivered smooth landings, calm announcements, perfect timings. To everyone else, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a reliable commercial pilot. Yet, something inside her had shifted. She started noticing things again. Tiny changes in wind behavior. Small delays in radio responses. Patterns in air traffic that most pilots ignored. Her mind was moving faster than before, connecting details without effort. The part of her she had locked away was awake now, stretching. Quietly, testing the air. One evening, after a long flight, she stayed behind in the cockpit while the crew disembarked. The cabin lights were dim, the aircraft silent. She sat there alone, listening to the soft ticking of cooling metal. This place had always felt honest to her. No pretending, no noise. Just machines and truth. Her phone vibr'd. This time, it was a call. She looked at the screen. The same unknown number. She let it ring once, twice, then she answered, "Yes." The voice on the other end was calm, older, steady, not rushed, not dramatic. "I was hoping you'd pick up." She didn't respond. A brief pause followed, respectful, as if the person understood silence as well as she did. "We don't want anything from you," the voice continued. "Not yet." She closed her eyes slowly. "Then why call?" "Because some situations don't show up on radar until it's too late," the voice said. "And some pilots see them sooner than others." She leaned back in the seat, staring at the dark windshield. I don't fly that kind of aircraft anymore, she said evenly. The voice did not argue. We know. Another pause. But you still fly like someone who remembers, he added. That landed harder than she expected. He spoke carefully after that. No classified words, no pressure, just hypotheticals. About crowded skies, new kinds of risks. Pilots trained on systems, but not instincts. Procedures without judgment. We're not asking you to return, he said. We're asking if you still care. The question stayed in the air between them. She thought of the passengers she carried every day. People who trusted invisible systems and unseen decisions. She thought of young pilots who relied fully on automation, never tested. Beyond checklists. I care, she said finally. That doesn't mean I belong there. That's fair, the voice replied. But belonging isn't always the point. The call ended shortly after. No instructions, no meeting arranged. Just a quiet understanding that a door was open. That night, sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake, listening to distant city sounds, watching shadows move across the ceiling. Her mind replayed moments from long ago times, when decisions had to be made in seconds, with no one to ask for permission. She had walked away from that life for a reason. It had taken pieces of her she never got back. Calm didn't come free, but neither did responsibility. The next day, during a routine briefing, a junior pilot asked her a question about handling unexpected turbulence. The answer in the manual was simple. She gave it, but then added something else. Something not written. Feel the aircraft, she said. Don't just watch it. The young pilot nodded, thoughtful. She realized then that maybe the sky didn't need her the way it used to. Maybe it needed her differently. Not in a fighter jet, but not invisible either. Later, during cruise, she adjusted the aircraft gently as weather shifted ahead. The ride stayed smooth. The cabin stayed calm. Somewhere far above, jets crossed paths. She couldn't see. She didn't chase them. She didn't too, because whether she returned to that world or not, one truth was clear now. Ghost Rider wasn't just a call sign. It was a way of flying. And no matter what uniform she wore, that part of her was never truly grounded. The turning point did not arrive with sirens or urgency. It came quietly, the way real change often does. A simple line in the flight schedule, a reroute note buried in operational updates. Most pilots would skim past it without a second thought. She didn't. The route passed close to a restricted corridor, one that only opened under special coordination. It wasn't dangerous, but it was sensitive. The kind of airspace where timing mattered more than distance, and where small errors became big problems. She felt it immediately. During pre-flight, she studied the weather charts longer than usual. High-altitude winds were shifting faster than forecasted. Nothing alarming on paper, but enough to create stress in crowded skies. She flagged it mentally, knowing most systems would react late, not early. After takeoff, everything unfolded normally. The climb was smooth, the passengers settled in, and the aircraft leveled off. Air traffic control was busy but controlled. Multiple aircraft shared the corridor, spaced carefully like pieces on a moving board. Then the first sign appeared. A delayed response from a nearby aircraft. Just a few seconds. Barely noticeable. But to her, it was loud. She adjusted speed slightly, keeping her tone neutral as she acknowledged instructions. The co-pilot noticed the change but didn't question it. He trusted her judgment. Everyone did. Moments later, the radio traffic thickened. Controllers issued faster instructions. Pilots read them back with slight tension creeping into their voices. The sky was tightening. She felt it before it was spoken. A convergence. 2 aircraft. We're adjusting for the same altitude window, reacting to the same wind shift from different sides. Systems would catch it, but late. Controllers would correct it, but with limited room. She didn't wait. Request minor heading adjustment, she said calmly. There was a pause. Controllers didn't like unplanned requests in tight airspace. "Stand by," came the reply. She held steady, eyes scanning, mind calculating faster than the displays. The angle, the timing. The safest escape path if needed. Then a new voice cut in. Military. Calm. Controlled. Traffic conflict forming. Recommend commercial flight. Maintain adjustment. The controller didn't argue this time. Approved. Maintain adjusted heading. The co-pilot looked at her, surprised. "You saw that early." She nodded once. It was there. The aircraft slipped smoothly into safer air. The potential conflict dissolved before passengers felt a thing. No alarms. No announcements. Just another calm flight. But this time, the silence afterward felt different. The military voice returned. Brief and respectful. "Good call." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. After landing, there was no meeting. No phone call. No card. Just a quiet note added to the system. A remark few would ever read. Situational awareness. Exceptional. That night, as she walked through the terminal, she noticed how people moved around her, families, workers, travelers, unaware of how fragile order in the sky could be. How much? It depended on judgment rather than machines. She sat at the gate after hours, watching aircraft depart one by one. Each light rising into darkness carried lives, stories, trust. She realized then what had truly changed. The question was no longer whether she would return to her past. The question was whether she could ignore the present. She didn't crave action. She didn't miss the noise. But she understood something now that she couldn't unlearn. Experience was not something to hide. It was something to apply. When it mattered. Her phone buzzed once. A short message. "We saw that." She looked up at the sky through the glass walls. She didn't answer. She didn't have to, because the decision had already begun forming, not as a dramatic return, but as a quiet acceptance. She would fly where she was most needed. And sometimes that meant staying exactly where she was. Watching. Anticipating. Protecting lives from problems they would never know existed. That, she realized, was still the work of Ghost Rider. The message did not come right away. Days passed, then weeks. The sky returned to its usual rhythm, and with it came the comfort of repetition. Early mornings. Late landings, familiar routes. She allowed herself to believe that whatever invisible test had been taking place was over. But deep down, she knew the truth. Real tests never announce themselves. Happened during a night flight. The kind most pilots disliked, and she quietly preferred. Fewer distractions, cleaner skies, less noise on the radio. Darkness had a way of revealing what daylight hid. The aircraft cruised smoothly above a blanket of clouds. The cabin lights were dimmed, passengers asleep or lost in their screens. The co-pilot monitored systems, relaxed but alert. Then, without warning, a fault message flashed briefly on the display. Not red. Not even amber. Transient. It disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. The co-pilot frowned. "Did you see that?" "Yes," she said calmly. Most pilots would log it and move on. The system had cleared itself. Procedures said continue and monitor. Her instincts said otherwise. She didn't change altitude. She didn't announce anything. She listened. The aircraft felt fine, but the air around it felt wrong. Slight pressure changes. A subtle lag in response. Not enough to alarm, but enough to suggest stress. She requested a small speed adjustment, framing it as fuel optimization. Air traffic control approved without hesitation. Minutes later, another fault appeared. This one lingered a second longer. She took control. "Your aircraft," she told the co-pilot gently. She began working through the situation quietly, mentally mapping outcomes before touching a single switch. She remembered nights long ago when systems failed for reasons no checklist explained. When judgment mattered more than procedure. The radio came alive again. A military frequency leaked through briefly. Unintentional but clear. Seeing abnormal behavior on that liner. Her co-pilot stiffened. "They're watching us." "They're watching the air," she replied. "We're just in it." She adjusted again, this time more decisively. The aircraft responded, smoothing out the subtle resistance she had felt earlier. The fault messages stopped appearing. The military voice returned, this time deliberate. "Commercial flight. Recommend descent by 1,000. Air traffic control echoed the instruction almost immediately. She complied without hesitation. The moment they entered the new altitude, the aircraft felt right again. Balanced, cooperative. No alarms. No passenger awareness. No drama. They continued the flight and landed safely. Maintenance later found nothing conclusive. The logs showed normal operations, but she knew something had been forming that night. Something systems hadn't fully captured. Yet after shutdown, while paperwork was completed, a notification appeared on her phone. Secure. No caller ID. Thank you for trusting your instincts. She stared at the screen for a long moment. She had spent years trying to quiet that inner voice, believing it belonged to a life she no longer lived. But instincts didn't expire. They adapted. On the drive home, city lights blurred past as she thought about responsibility, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that acts before others notice danger. She wasn't being pulled back into her past. She was being asked to stand at the edge of the present. To be a safeguard, a silent one. Later that night, she opened an old flight notebook she hadn't touched in years. Blank pages waited at the back. She picked up a pen and wrote one line. Still flying, still watching. She closed the book. The sky didn't need heroes and headlines. It needed professionals who noticed what others missed. And as long as she was flying, Ghost Rider was still on duty. The offer never arrived in words. There was no formal request, no uniformed knock on the door, no dramatic meeting in a secured room. Instead, there was a shift, subtle but undeniable, in how the sky responded to her presence. Routes changed slightly when she was on duty. Clearances came faster. Military traffic adjusted without explanation. It was never obvious enough to question, but consistent enough to feel intentional. She had become a quiet constant. On one final flight of the month, weather systems across the region began to compress unexpectedly. Thunderheads rose faster than forecasted, forcing multiple aircraft into tighter corridors. Air traffic control stayed calm, but the strain was audible beneath their professionalism. She felt it again. That familiar tightening of air and timing. This time, she didn't wait for instructions. She anticipated them. Before controllers issued new headings, she positioned the aircraft for the safest exit from developing turbulence. When the call came, she was already there. "Commercial flight. Confirm current heading." "Confirmed," she replied, ready for further adjustment. There was a brief pause on the frequency. Then a military voice entered, measured, respectful. "Ghost Rider has the picture." The co-pilot froze. So did she. The words weren't loud. They weren't dramatic, but they carried finality. Recognition without exposure. A message meant for those who understood. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The flight passed through the weather smoothly. Other aircraft followed safer paths, guided by adjustments that traced back to her early movements. The system absorbed her judgment without ever naming it. Passengers arrived unaware they had passed through unstable skies. They collected bags, called loved ones, moved on with their lives. She completed her shutdown checklist in silence. That night, as she walked across the quiet tarmac toward the terminal, she looked up one last time. The clouds were breaking, revealing stars scattered across the dark. She thought about the question she had wrestled with for weeks, whether she belonged to the past or the present. Now she understood. She belonged to the sky itself, not as a fighter pilot, not as a symbol, But as a steady presence where experience mattered most, her phone vibrated once more. Final message. No need to answer. We know where to find you. She slipped the phone into her pocket and kept walking. Tomorrow she would fly another commercial. Route. Another normal flight. Another group of strangers trusting her without knowing her name. And somewhere above, beyond radar and recognition, a call sign would remain unspoken yet understood. Ghost Rider, not a legend, not a secret, just a pilot who never stopped watching the sky.